My name's Hannah Lewman, and I'm a senior studying advertising in the School of Journalism and Communication. I recently worked on a project titled Saving Polar Bears in the Heartland, using framing theory to create regional environmental communication. This was a thesis project presented at the School of Journalism and Communication and to the Clark Honors College. My primary thesis advisor was Professor Kim Sheehan, my second reader was Professor Deborah Morrison, and my Clark Honors College rep was Professor Timothy Williams. I secured funding through the Clark Honors College Extraordinary Research Grant, and Kim Sheehan secured funding through the School of Journalism and Communication. I was drawn to the topic of environmental communication because I think climate change is the issue of our time, and addressing it requires the minds of more than just scientists, but of creative people across all fields. I think creative people and communicators have a lot to offer to the topic of climate change because they help us imagine new ways to live and to adjust our attitudes to become more resilient. And that's what my thesis is about. My thesis uses framing theory to help create messaging that will shift people's attitudes. Now, framing theory is the main tool that communicators use to craft messaging. With a topic as broad as climate change, there's a lot of different stories you can tell, but framing refers to what you focus on and what you leave out of the picture. Framing theory completely changes what an audience takes away from a message, what they see as problems, and how they diagnose solutions. There's 8 major established ways to frame climate change. You can talk about the economic elements of switching over to green energy, or the moral implications of pollution and waste. You can talk about two sides finding middle ground, or you can talk about conflict and strategy between opposing sides. There's tons of different frames of climate change, 8 major ways to tell these stories. And my thesis focuses on what's the best way to talk about climate change in each region of the U.S. To test this research question, I got 1,000 respondents on Amazon Mechanical Turk, a crowdsourcing platform. Each respondent was exposed to one different frame of climate change for 30 seconds. There was 8 messages that used a frame of climate change and 1 control message. After exposure for 30 seconds, respondents answered a survey about how likely they were to take different types of action and what their attitudes were toward climate change. I then looked for statistically significant differences between groups that had seen different messages. I conducted this analysis on a regional level and on a national level. What I expected going into this thesis was to find one top frame for each region, one message that was correlated with consistently high environmental attitudes and desire to take action. I expected to create this map saying how to talk about climate change most effectively in each region of the country. What I found is that this is not a realistic way to create strategy for messaging something as complex and politicized as climate change. What I ended up finding was more nuanced, a set of insights and recommendations in this large data set about how to more effectively communicate climate change. It wasn't as simple as one message per region, but I was able to create a set of recommendations for strategic communicators. My research builds on the findings of Dan Kahn, who theorizes that people have 2 main functions. They're knowledge acquirers, but they're also identity protectors, and people are more likely to reject a message if it clashes with their identity. This was a consistent finding throughout my data. What I found were the messages that were most effective were the ones that don't make people choose between their identity and their knowledge. Messages that drew attention to the conflict and the 2 sides of the climate change debate often created less environmentalist responses overall. This is likely because people were thinking about the 2 sides of the debate and thinking about their answers not as a reflection of their knowledge, but as a reflection of which side of the debate they wanted to be on. Instead of choosing answers that reflected their actual experiences or their actual beliefs about the environment, people would pick answers that showed what side of a socio-political divide they wanted to associate with. I created a set of 8 recommendations for communicators, but most of them centered around this theme, knowledge versus identity, and how to create more effective strategic communications that don't ask people to pick between what they know and who they are. As a whole, these findings build upon existing social science communication about messaging that incorporates regional effects of climate change and messaging that incorporates an audience's identity. By combining these 2 existing areas of study, I found a middle ground on which to build strategic recommendations. I think creative people have so much to contribute in terms of helping us to adapt to the effects of climate change. I hope these recommendations can help guide some of them.